Hi everyone, this is Pam Price of PamTech Coding. I create videos that take complex programming concepts and break them down into digestible, bite-sized pieces. And in this video, we are going to learn about looping in JavaScript. Looping is a very important concept to understand. Basically, all of programming is done with only three main control structures. You only have three ways of controlling the order that things are executed in your program. Either it's sequence, which is just you just do one thing at a time. Selection is what we use with if statements that allow you to make a decision about what action to take based on a question. And then the third one is looping. This allows you to repeat a series of instructions over and over again. And one of the reasons why that's important is because in programming, copy and paste is not your friend. What you want to write is dry code, which means don't repeat yourself. So anytime you see code that you want to repeat, you need to think about using a loop for that, or sometimes putting that code into a function. So let's talk about looping. First of all, just the concept. How can I generate and print the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 only using a single variable? So I have to use a variable. Well, I would have a variable called num. I would assign it to 1. I can now print that and it'll print 1. Then I can increment that variable and it becomes 2 and 3 and 4 and so forth, right? Here's how I'm tracing through what is going on. So when num is 1, we're keeping track of what's the value of our variable is 1. And when we say print num, it prints whatever is in that variable, which is 1. Then I increment it. So now notice I crossed out the 1. The value in num is now 2. When we now say print, then we add on the 2, right? And we increment it to 3. We add on the 3 to our output. We increment it to 4. We add on the 4 to our output. We increment it to 5. We add on the 5 to our output. And this is fine, but if I wanted to print the numbers from 1 to 100, that would be a lot of copy and pasting. So we notice that there's redundancy in this code. These two statements, print and increment, are done over and over again. So we're going to use the while loop to do this. When you have a loop has a body of instructions. As a matter of fact, let me just print this out. The way a loop works is you have a condition, and inside, this is the loop body. And so whatever is, when you get to the beginning of the loop, that condition is evaluated, similar to an if statement. And if it's true, you execute the body of the loop, and then you go right back here to evaluate it again. And you will continue to do this as long as that condition is true. So let's look at a simple counting loop, because the basis for understanding looping, I think, is understanding how a simple counting loop works. So here is how we take that code and turn it into a loop. So we have this variable num that we give an initial value. All right, I want to actually show you. Let's walk through this code, which means I need to kind of put my whiteboard over here so I can see both of these at one time. All right, so here's my code, and here is where I'm going to trace it. It is so critical to understand how to read code and how to actually walk through so that you can anticipate what you believe your code will do before you even run it. Okay, so when you do this, you need to keep track of what's in your variables. So I have this variable called num that I'm initializing to 1, right? I separately need to keep track of what is the output that I'm seeing on my screen. So num is 1. We get to this condition. We evaluate this condition. Is 1 less than or equal to 5? That is true. So we go into the body of the loop and we console log what is in num. So we see 1. We then increment this. So num becomes 2, right? This is an assignment statement. The current value 1 plus 1 is 2, and that replaces the value that was in num. We come back and evaluate the condition again. 2 less than or equal to 5 is true, so we print 2. This becomes 3. We evaluate it again. 3 less than or equal to 5 is true. We print 3. This becomes 4. We evaluate it again. 4 less than or equal to 5 is true. We print 4. This becomes 5. 5 less than or equal to 5 is true. We print 5. Now this is very important here. It becomes 6. 6 less than or equal to 5 is false, and that is what causes the loop to end. And it goes to whatever statements are outside of the body of the loop. All right? Now, let's code this in JavaScript. Now that we've figured out what we expected to happen, let's actually code it in JavaScript. So all I have here is a document that just an HTML with just a header, and it's attached to this JavaScript. So we're going to write a simple counting loop. So a loop typically has a loop control variable that needs to be initialized. So we're going to initialize our loop control variable. I'm going to call it num. And you're going to want to use let for this. If you use const, it's not going to work because remember, you can't change the value of a const. Now we set up our loop. So I'm going to say while num is less than or equal to 5. Here is my loop body. So what do I want to do? I want to print num. And then I need to increment it. Or actually, I'm going to use the word update. So I'm going to say num equals num plus 1. Right? Just by the way, there's several other ways I could write this increment statement that way. I could also write it as num plus equal 1. I could also write it as num plus plus. Those all work. And just so we're sure that our loop has ended, let's put a console log out here that says done. All right, so here is my loop over here. Actually, let me start my live server again. And look at my console. All right, so look at what we have. So we printed out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and done. Okay, so our loop did exactly what we wanted it to do. All right, let's think about, I'm going to give you guys some things here, and you should pause the video and think about what's going to happen. But let's make a few changes here and understand what happens. So what happens if I change this number to 10? Now, before you actually execute it, I want you to think about it. All right, I'm going to pause here. So let's take a look. So it prints the numbers from 1 to 10, right? Because as long as num is less than or equal to 10, we will go into this loop body. We get permission to go inside, and we will print that value. And so the last number that will meet this condition will be 10. 10 less than or equal to 10 will be true. We'll print 10. It will become 11, and the loop will stop, right? So we can change here. This is a basic counting loop, and there's 3 things that we can control. We can control the starting number, we can control the ending number, and we can control the increment. So what I've just done is change the ending number. All right. Suppose I change the update here. Suppose I change this to 2. What is going to happen now when this loop runs? I want you to think about it before you actually run it. All right, so let's think about it before I actually look and see what happened. Num is 1. 1 is less than or equal to 10. We're going to print 1. What's the next value we're going to have? 1 plus 2 is 3. Is 3 less than or equal to 10? Yes. We'll print that one. What's the next number going to be? 5. So we're going to print odd numbers, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So the last number that got printed, 9 less than or equal to 10, was true. This would get updated to 11. 11 less than or equal to 10 is false, and the loop ends, right? Suppose I change my starting number to 2. What's going to happen now? The first number will be 2. What's the next number going to be? 4. So we'll get 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and done. All right? Now, there's a few things we have to understand about loops. All those work, but we can make a lot of mistakes with loops. So, for example, we'll leave it here with our 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Sometimes people get a little confused with their less than or greater than signs here. Suppose I make that the condition. What am I going to get? It printed out looping because remember that's just at my very beginning here, and it prints out done. What does that mean? That means it never went into the body of the loop. Why not? Well, because if num is 2, the very first time this condition is evaluated, it's asking the question, is 2 greater than or equal to 10? And that's false. So if that's false, you skip the loop completely, right? So there's never a guarantee that you will execute the statements that are in the body of the loop. It's a pre-test loop. That means you ask this question first, and only if it's true do you get permission to go into the body of the loop, right? So that's one common mistake. This is why you need to think about what you're doing as you're coding. All right, another common thing that's important, there is such thing as an infinite loop. So if I never change the value of num here, let's think about what's going to happen. Num is 2. 2 is less than or equal to 10. So we print out 2. What do? We go back here. What's the value of num? It's still 2. Is 2 less than or equal to 10? Yes, 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 right? And you see how this is just circling? And we are printing 2 over and over and over again. And this is an example of an infinite loop, right? Very easy thing to do. Let's see if I can get out of it now. And when this happens, things get kind of crazy. So let me just restart my live server. All right. Yes, now we're back to that. All right. So it's really important to understand this basic counting loop. Now, I'm going to go back to the count by 1. Let's just go to 5. Or let's say that, now let's do this. Let's just go to 5. All right. And let's use our num plus plus. All right, suppose instead of printing num, because I don't have to do that, I'm going to print out hello, right? How many times is it going to print out hello? Let me fix my, looks like it's still running my infinite loop. So let's go back and double check. Num equals 1, less than or equal to 5, and I'm incrementing. Okay, I think it was because I was making the change while I was in there. All right, so you see it prints out hello 5 times. That's why there's a 5 there, right? If I run it again, we'll see. So I sometimes use a loop because I want to do things a certain number of times. And in this case, num is acting as a counter. So it's keeping track of how many times I am doing something. All right. Um, so that's our basic counting loop. Now, let's actually make a function. All right. We're going to make a function that I'm going to comment this out. We're going to use some of it, but we're going to, instead of having it here, we're going to do things as a function. So I want to write a function to print the numbers from 1 to n, whatever value I pass. So in other words, I'm going to call this function print nums. And let's say if I did print nums 5, I would want it to print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we're going to set this function print nums, and it has a parameter called num that I'm going to pass to it. Actually, I'm going to call this parameter max because that's a more useful name. It's the maximum number that I want to print, right? What do I want to do? Print the numbers from 1 to max, including max, right? So I am going to need a variable in here. In this case, I'm going to call it count because it's acting as a counter. So names are kind of useful. And we're going to say while count is less than, and I'm going to make a little mistake here to show you something, less than max. So we're going to print the number, or print count, and then we need to update. You always need to update. In this case, count is our loop control variable, and we need to update it. Okay? Now, right now I have nothing. Why is that? Because I've written a function, but I haven't called it, right? So here's my function. I need to call the function. So I'm going to say print nums. If I say 5, so the idea, remember I said it should print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, I'm just getting 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is why testing is important. And if you're not getting exactly what you want, you have to walk through your code and realize what happens when I get to 4. So let's say count is 4. I've just printed out the 4. Count becomes 5. And remember, 5 is what I've passed in to max, right? In case you're not sure, let's do max is. So we know. All right, so max is 5. So when count becomes 5, 5 less than 5 is false. And that's why the loop ends. So we need count less than or equal to if we want to include that number, right? So now we have a function that we can, if I said 50, it will print the numbers from 1 to 50. All right. So that's a good example of using a loop in a function. And there are a number of ways that we can use it. But again, the first thing that's really important is to understand the mechanics of how a while loop works. So again, count is my loop control. It's the variable that's controlling this loop. It needs to have an initial value. As a matter of fact, let's see what happens if we don't initialize it. right? Look at what it says. Count is not defined, right? So we have to at least uh, give it this variable, but let's say we don't give it an initial value. Well, I don't have anything, right? Let's put this back to 5. And to debug, let's see what's in count. Right? Count is undefined. If it's undefined, I can't increment it, right? So that's why it's important to give this an initial starting number. Then remember, when you get to while, you evaluate this condition. As long as it is true, you get permission to go in and do whatever is in the body of the loop. Once that, and then when the body finishes, you come back and reevaluate this condition. Every iteration, you reevaluate it. And when it finally becomes false, that is when your loop ends. All right? So we will do some other things with loops, but it's very important to make sure you understand this basic counting loop, because it is kind of the foundation of understanding looping. And in this case, this loop control variable, I called it count because it's sort of acting as a counter. Um, that's not a specific data type or anything, but that's sort of what its job is each time it's being incremented. All right, and if there are any comments or any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment box there. And if you like this video, please like it and subscribe. And thanks a lot. Hope you learned a lot.